Hello, students! It's Mrs. Sanzone, and here we are with yet another set of notes. Yay! I know you're super excited. Um, Actually, although I know you're not probably super excited about this, this is, I think, a really interesting and applicable topic for our lives today, and I think you're probably going to understand this pretty well, and I'm excited about that because we are going to be talking about environmental issues. Please make sure you have a piece of Cornell notepaper in front of you and you have a pen or a pencil. I would prefer you use a pencil, and then if you want to go over it in pen, it just makes it easier so if you make a mistake, you can fix it. Okay, first we're going to start with our topic slash objective. And our topic objective today is environmental issues. So make sure you write that in your Cornell notes. And for today, we have not one, but two essential questions. So you might need to go into the notes section on your Cornell note paper. That's okay, just kind of block it off and make sure you can tell that it's an essential question and not actually part of the notes. So our essential questions today are number one, what are the general categories of environmental issues? Because they can fall into more than one category. And number two, how do decision makers balance the different needs and concerns? Okay, so when you have an environmental issue that you want to take care of, how do the people who make the decisions balance what people need and what costs and benefits might be involved in those environmental issues? Okay, now we're ready to get into our notes section, and I'm going to start with a heading for the first topic, and that is types of environmental issues. So I'm going to center that on my page, and it's bolded and underlined so I know that it's important. And here we're going to note first, before we get into it, that environmental issues fall into three general categories: resource use, population growth, and pollution. Okay, so I have that starred. That's important to know. Resource use, population growth, and pollution. So we're going to start with resource use. That's going to be our first heading underneath this big topic of environmental issues. Resource use. And we're going to define what different resources are. So first we're going to talk about what natural resources are. So I'm going to put that under my resource use heading. But I'm going to tab it over so I can tell that it's underneath this category here. A natural resource is anything in the environment that occurs naturally that can be used by people. Anything in the environment that is used by people is a natural resource. So if you think about the things around you that you might use, air, water, wood, oil, wind energy, coal, iron, those are all resources that occur naturally that people use. Okay, so I'm going to put that up there, my examples. Examples are air, water, wood, oil, wind energy, coal, and iron. I'm going to put this little picture in here too. So a natural resource is something found in nature that people use to meet their needs. Okay? And natural resources can fall under two different categories. One is something called a renewable resource. So that's also under this resource use heading. So I'm tabbing it under, but it's an important definition that we need to have. So what is a renewable resource? A renewable resource is a resource that is either always available or something that can be naturally replaced in a relatively short period of time. Okay, so it's something that if you use it up, you can make more if you need to, and you can either it's either always there or you can make it pretty quickly. So examples of that are oxygen, wood, and leather. Now, obviously, oxygen is pretty much all around all the time. Wood, though, like it is a renewable resource, but you can cut down too many trees and cause a problem for yourself and make it so it's not as available as it could be. And there are examples of that in history. But here we have I'm going to put a little picture in of renewable energy. So here are things that are renewable. Examples of renewable energy are wind energy, geothermal energy, which is basically you have pipes running underneath the ground, and because the ground, as you go deeper and deeper into the earth, it's pretty warm down there. It heats the water naturally, and that can help churn a turbine or heat your house. Water is a renewable resource. Biomass, which includes like trees and solar energy, those are all examples of renewable energy sources. And we're going to read some articles in class that talk about how you can seriously strain a renewable resource, even though they are usually readily available and can be reproduced. There are examples in history of people who have gone too far and have made it very, very difficult for them to access those resources. But I'm not going to get into that just yet. I would like to read about those in class. So we have renewable resources, again, those things that are always available or can be naturally replaced in a relatively short period of time, but there are also things that are non-renewable resources. Again, this is under the heading of resource use. See, I've tabbed down, and we're going to define what a non-renewable resource is. Non-renewable resources are natural resources that are not replaced in a useful amount of time. So it doesn't mean that they could never be replaced, but it means that it just takes too long for them to be replaced, that it's not really useful to us. So natural resources that are not replaced in a useful time frame are known as non-renewable resources. And examples of those include fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. Those are all non-renewable resources. And I have an example, a little picture here for you. Gas, coal, oil, and nuclear energy are all also non-renewable resources. Again, so if you used up a bunch of coal, eventually coal is made from organic material that's been compressed and laid dormant for hundreds of thousands of millions of years. It will be replaced eventually, but not in a useful amount of time for us. It takes too long. And all of these things, renewable resources and non-renewable resources and resource use, are all tied into population growth. So what happens, so this is a new heading here, population growth. When a population grows, the demand for resources also grows. Now, we talked about this when we looked at species, populations, and communities and ecosystems. Obviously, the more organisms in a given area, they're going to use up more resources. And so it makes sense that when a population grows, the demand for resources also increases. And I have a little graph for you to look at. Let's see, you can see, you don't have to draw this in, but as the population in billions goes up over the years, the amount of food and energy that is used is also increasing. So here's the population line, is the black one. Grain, which is an example of food, is the purple line. So as the black line goes up, the purple line goes up. And energy, the total amount of energy being used also goes up. So they go up together. And that's important to know. Again, so if you have an increasing population that's growing really, really quickly, sometimes the amount of resources, it's limited, right? It's a limiting factor. So what can happen is that you might have shortages. So it's important to note that shortages may occur when there is a demand for resources that is greater than their availability. So an example of this would be, I remember it was probably 10 years ago, we had a really, 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 really hot summer and people were running their air conditioners. And I know in some cities, they started doing something called brownouts, which mean they would limit electricity at certain times of day, and so people might not have access to their electricity for like a couple hours. Sometimes blackouts can occur too. If too many people are using a resource, then you might end up having blackouts. So if you don't have enough energy available because there are too many people trying to get that energy. Hey, here they are having to do their homework by candlelight. Other examples happened, again, now in the 1970s, there were oil shortages and people would have to get in line and they could only get gas on certain days of the week, depending on their license plate number. They would have to line up for gas, and there would be lines like miles long, just waiting in line for gas. And then remember when my dad came to speak to us on Veterans Day about his dad when he was in World War II. He talked about ration stamps that people had, that they could only go buy a certain amount of milk or bread or sugar during the week, and so that's because there were shortages. There was too much demand for resources, and there wasn't enough available, and so they had to ration it. And that can occur when your population increases. Next, we're going to look at pollution. And what is pollution? And I think that's something you are really familiar with. So that under the heading of pollution, we're going to first define what pollution is. So I'm putting this under the heading of pollution, and I'm going to tab it in. Pollution is any contamination of the Earth's land, water, or air. And it can look like a lot of different things. There are a lot of different forms of pollution. So any sort of contamination is known as pollution. Actually, I'm going to put this down here a little bit so we can keep it on the same page. All right, pollution is the contamination of the Earth's water, land, water, or air. And this can be caused by many factors. And so, you can think about the typical pollution that you think of, like someone littering on the side of the road, but it can also be other things too that are pollutants. So it can be caused by many factors, including chemicals, waste, heat. There can be heat pollution, light pollution, noise pollution. And it's also important to note that pollution is often related to resource use and population growth. So the more resources that are being used because the population is higher, the more pollution there is potentially in the area. So here are some examples of pollution. So here we have people on a boat. So this is both water pollution and land pollution. In this case, it seems to be in the form of garbage. Here we have an example of air pollution, and those factories are pumping things into the air, probably some carbon emissions there. Remember we talked about the carbon cycle? Looks like maybe this is fossil fuels being burned. Next, I'm going to bring an example of light pollution. So if you ever have gone to a city, you might notice if you look up at the night sky, you can't really see many stars, and then you go out into the country and you can see more stars. It's not that over country areas there are more stars in the sky. It's just that you can't see them from a city because the light from the buildings in the city and people in their houses and street lights, those are all basically polluting the air, so you can't see the light from the stars. It drowns them out. And here's an example of noise pollution. So these people, if they're living near a busy airport, planes are flying over, and that's an example of noise pollution. Okay, so that's pollution. So that's our first little category here. We looked at the types of environmental issues: resource use, population growth, and pollution. So we talked about natural resources, that some may be renewable, meaning that they can be replaced in a short period of time or they're always available. And we talked about non-renewable resources, which are not replaced in a useful time frame. Then we talked about population growth, and that should be familiar that when a population grows, the demand for resources also grows. We talked about shortages, and then we've talked about pollution, which is contamination of land, water, air, and it can be in the form of chemicals, waste, heat, light, and noise. And now we're going to go into our next big heading, and that is making environmental decisions. So make sure you've centered this on your paper. And Mrs. Sanzone's got to get her act together so I can highlight this and drag it up there. 1 second. Okay, making environmental decisions. Oh, that's lovely. Okay. Bear with me, people. Aha, here we go. Making environmental decisions. Actually, I'm going to tab down for a second so I can get that to the top of the page. There we go. Making environmental decisions. And environmental decisions, you might think that they're made only like the government does that, and it's made at a national level. Well, it's not just that. Environmental decisions can be made at personal levels, so you yourself making decisions, local levels, so maybe it's our town or our state. It can be national, meaning the whole country is they're making decisions that affects the whole country, or they can be global, meaning that a bunch of countries come together and they make decisions about what's in the best interest of the world, and they might make laws that the countries have to follow. And so that's an important thing to know. So under environmental decisions, I want you to note that these may be made at personal, local, national, or global levels. And so what might be a personal environmental decision might be the decision to use a renewable grocery bag versus using the plastic bags that are available at the grocery store. And if you're making the decision to choose one reusable bag, this gives you an example of how many bags are used over the course of a couple of months, and it's kind of alarming. I know sometimes I forget my reusable bags and I get plastic bags, and it doesn't feel good to do that. But that's a personal decision. Other personal decisions might be to turn off the lights when you leave a room, or I know this is controversial, but maybe not flushing the toilet every time you go to the bathroom, or only flushing in certain instances. And those are personal decisions. I think you understand what some local and national environmental decisions that might be made. I know, for example, in the town where my mother and father-in-law live, their local decision was that they've actually banned plastic bags. They've also banned styrofoam cups. So if you go to the Dunkin' Donuts in that town, you'll get a paper cup. You won't get a styrofoam cup. And those are local decisions. Some national decisions might be to put a limit on the type of emissions a car makes. And then global levels, I'm going to give you an example of that. So there's a group that exists called the G7. And the G7 is a group of countries, includes Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And actually, those are 7 countries, but it also represents all of the European Union. So any country that's involved in the European Union is also represented. And they make economic decisions for the world. They try to come up with solutions to economic problems. But sometimes those economic problems are also influenced by, or they influence, environmental issues. And so recently in the G7 summit in 2015, they made an agreement to phase out fossil fuel use by the end of the century. And their goal is to decarbonize the global economy, meaning that they're not contributing to excess carbon emissions. So that's an example of a global issue. And here's a little picture of all the different leaders, world leaders that are represented by the G7 summit. So that's an example of national or global levels. And these decisions that are being made have some impact on the environment. That's an important to note, that obviously environmental issues, environmental decisions are going to have some impact on the environment. And sometimes those decisions help the environment, sometimes they hurt the environment, or sometimes they're just made so that no additional harm is made. So it's kind of a neutral area. Maybe they're not decreasing the levels of carbon in the air, but they're also making an effort not to increase it either. So that's an example of some of the decisions that might be made. And in making environmental decisions, they have to do a lot of balancing of different needs. And so a lot of times, lawmakers work with different groups to make environmental decisions. And some of the people, oh, goodness gracious. So lawmakers work with groups to make sure that the environmental decisions they make are the ones that they really do want to be making, and the type of people that they might enlist to help them make these decisions include environmental scientists. So it's important for us here to define what environmental science is. So environmental science, and I'm pretty sure you are going to understand what this is. Environmental science is the study of natural processes in the environment and how humans can affect them. So it's basically the study of the natural world and what kind of impact humans can have on the natural world. And I would like to note that to help balance the different needs, the different opinions on an environmental issue, decision makers weigh the costs and benefits of a proposal. So anytime they're going to make a decision, obviously people have different opinions. If you went home and you asked your entire family what they want for dinner, maybe sometimes you all agree, but I bet there are quite a bit of times, or quite a few times, where people don't agree on what to eat. And that's the same, that probably only gets bigger as you include more and more people. And so what are the types of decisions, opinions, and weighing the costs and benefits of a proposal? How does that look? So here we go. The types of costs and benefits include jobs. Will there be jobs that are created? That would be a benefit. And some of the costs that might be included are, will trees be cut down? Will rivers be harmed? Will a certain population of animal have to move? An example we have of that locally was that a couple of years ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, they're trying to make a decision on whether or not to have a natural gas refueling station in Elliott. And actually, you can see it right out the window of my classroom. XNG, there's like trucks that go in and out. And there were decisions that had to be made on what were the costs and what were the benefits. And one of the costs was that there's a certain turtle that lives in the marsh nearby, Blanding's turtle. And there were a lot of discussions about whether or not having the trucks coming in and maybe bringing in some money to the town of Elliott would be worth having, putting the marsh at risk and putting these turtles at risk. So those are some of the types of costs and benefits that might be considered. Additionally, so you figure out what types of costs and benefits there will be, and then you have to weigh them. Do the benefits outweigh the costs? So is it better in the long run? I know it might cost these things to us, but in the long run, is this the best decision for everybody? So I've come up with a little scenario for you. Well, first of all, I want to show you that there are books written about this, the costs and benefits of environmental regulation. These are the types of pamphlets and literature that lawmakers and decision makers about environmental issues have to look at. And here's an example of what might be included in the book. So, for example, looking at the type of pollutants that might exist and the estimate of how much it costs to regulate this sort of pollutant and what it actually costs in the long run. So these are the things that they might look at. So I have an example for how this might look in your life. So bear with me. So let's say, for example, you are a huge fan of the band Five Sauce, and you are saving up to go see a concert that's coming up in Boston, and you really, really, really want to go. Okay, so you're saving up your money, but a new t-shirt comes out of the band, and you see it in the store, and you really, really, really want to buy the t-shirt. So the cost is that let's say it costs you $25 to buy this t-shirt, and you're saving up for a $125 concert. And maybe you've already saved up $75. So you're more than halfway there. All you have is $50 more to go, but you really, really, really want this t-shirt. And how awesome would it be to have this t-shirt at the concert? and so you decide to buy it. Well, now you're back down to $50. You've only saved $50 for the concert. You have $75 more to go. So you have to decide for yourself. Is the benefit of having this t-shirt now worth having to spend a little bit more time and maybe do a few more chores or do some more babysitting gigs in order to save up the money? And that's the type of decision you might have to make. And maybe it is. Maybe some of you would decide, yeah, it is worth it. And some of you might decide, nope, it isn't worth it. But that's an example of decisions that you might have to make in your life. Another example, so we're not just focused on 5-sauce, although I know that's quite important to some of you, and that's okay. What if you're saving up for the game Assassin's Creed, and the new Assassin's Creed, what is it, Assassin's Creed 5 maybe, comes out, and you're really, really excited about it, and you have saved up a lot of money, but then all of a sudden you see at GameStop that Battlefield Hardline has come out, and now you have to weigh the costs and benefits. You really, really like Assassin's Creed, and you've played the 4 others before, but oh my goodness, do I really, really want this Battlefield Hardline game? And you have to make the decision. What's the cost of buying one over the other? What are the long-term benefits? And how is it going to make you feel? So those are our notes for today. Just as a recap, we started with talking about the types of environmental issues. We talked about resource use, population growth, and pollution. And then we went into talking about environmental decisions that are made at personal levels, local levels, national levels, and global levels. And we talked a little bit about what the global level might look like. And then we discussed balancing the different needs, knowing that when you're making an environmental decision, it's not just black and white. There are a lot of different factors that need to be included. And we've not only talked about this here in these notes, but we've talked about it all year. When we've talked about the Kirtland's warbler in Michigan, where they're trying to decide whether or not to save this little bird, and the costs and the benefits of that decision, and how there's so many different factors that you wouldn't ever expect that come into play. But basically that's what it comes down to, figuring out what the costs are, what the benefits are, and making a decision. Anyway, don't forget to do your summary, and that is all. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys are treating the substitute teacher nicely today and yesterday. Thanks so much. Bye.